نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. فقد نوينا أتعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على خير وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah. So in our discussions on the al-Matan, the Matan al-Ajurrumiyya, we've been discussing about the i'rab. And the i'rab is the most important aspect of nahw, because by knowing the i'rab, one will know what harakah goes on each word and what state each word is in, whether they're speaking, whether they're writing, or whether they're just merely reading or understanding. We mentioned before the purposes of it is to صيانة اللسان عن الخطأ في كلام العربية, to protect the tongue from making mistakes in Arabic, and that includes the tongue of the hand, which is the pen. And many students, in speaking is depends on if they're aiming for fusha or not. But in writing, there's a lot of mistakes. But even in understanding, not having a strong grammar can affect one's translation, and that's the most dangerous. There has been egregious misunderstandings in the prophetic narrations because of one vowel, and due to a lack of knowledge. And this is why it's so important to have that chain of transmission, to take knowledge from someone who's authorized, and have the knowledge of these things. And these are just basics, let alone the high level discussions. As one person, he was trying to argue with Shaykh Yusuf, and he just asked him, how many types of hatta are there? Because there's 14, I only know 7. How many do you know? If you can't answer that, then why are you discussing high level prophetic narrations and translation of Qur'an and philosophical issues? So grammar is at the center of grammar is i'rab, is the inflections. So we talked about rafa' and its signs. So rafa', and just I brought the so rafa' and nasab, the default sign being the dhamma and the fatha. But according to the word and according to the situation, there may be something substituting the dhamma. So we talked about the 4 substitutes of the dhamma. We talked about nasab, that its default sign is a fatha, but according to the word, it may have substitutes, and we discussed that. And those are shared by nouns and verbs. So these are some of the answers, questions that were on the homework. Most of you got it right. So these two are shared between the nouns and the verbs. Specific to the nouns is khafd, or if you like, jar. Both the same word. They both mean the same thing. Its default is a kasra, but it has substitutes. Sometimes one substitute is a fatha. So these are things that can be confusing, unless we keep on top of them and revise. Like لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي Yusuf fa. Yusuf is makhfud. It's a makhfud word. But its sign is a fatha as a substitute to the kasra, because it's a special type of word. We took that last week, but these are only for nouns. No verb will ever be makhfud. And the last one is jazm, whose sign is the sukun, and it's only for verbs. So no noun will ever be majzum. Even though when we speak, we say dhahaba Zayd. You stop on Zayd. That's because the Arabs, they didn't pronounce the last letter of the word that they stop on. But that doesn't mean that Zayd doesn't have a vowel. When you write it, you have to write the dhamma. If you're going to write the harakah. If you're not going to write the harakah, you're not going to write anything. But if I said ra'aytu Zaydan, then most colloquial speech, they'll just say ra'aytu Zayd, which is not right. But obviously we're not in a classroom, so you're not going to criticize people. Right? رأيت زيد. No, it's رأيت زيدا. If you're going to stop, رأيت زيدا. Right? Or if you're going to continue, رأيت زيدا. But you'll never see, right, a noun that has a sukun on the end. Right? You'll never see a noun that has a sukun on the end. Right? That is only for verbs, and today we'll be finishing off these 4 types by talking about the last one, the jazm. So jazm is a sukun. Right? The default is a sukun. It has substitutes according to the word. Right? And the word, by here we mean by different types of verbs. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about verbs because of this. And just to reiterate, and this was on the test, this is just from some of the answers, it's a little bit confusing, but the inflections are these 4. This is a state, right? This is the name of the inflection itself. Rafa, nasab, khafd, and jazm. The word that has this inflection, right, is called marfu', mansub, makhfud, or majzoom. So if you're talking about the word that's in the state of rafa, you would say it's marfu'. Right? But if you're talking about, right, what are the signs of, right, this state, you would just say rafa. Right? Rafa is the state of any word that has a dhamma or its substitutes. Right? Rafa is the state, not the word itself. Right? Nasab is the state of a word that has a fatha or its substitutes. Right? And jazm is the state of a verb that has, right, the sukun on the end or any of its substitutes. The verb, the word, right, the noun, they are majzoom, mansub, marfu', right, that you would use that term. Right? So marfu' comes from the same root words. Right? And we'll talk about the derivative words. Ism maf'ul is the noun of object. The noun of object. We talked about, I think in the first class, we're using the example of shakara. Who remembers what shukr means? Not the company. Right? Who remembers what shukr means? Anyone? To be thankful. Right? Thanksgiving, right? Canadian Thanksgiving. Right? So shukr means gratitude. So that's a noun. Right? There's no tense in gratitude. Right? Or to be grateful. There's no tense in that. Right? Shakir is the nominal doer. Right? It's a person, right? The one who is grateful. Again, there's no tense, it's a noun. Mashkur is the one who gratitude is being shown to, so it's the nominal object. Right? So mashkur, right? Same pattern as marfu'. The word that is marfu', the word that is in the state of rafa, or mansub, the word that's in a state of nasab. Like ma'loom. What does ilm mean? Alima? Knowledge. Right? Knowledge. So the thing that is known, the item of information, is ma'loom. So if you buy, for instance, like a toaster in an Arab country, you'll get an instruction manual. Right? It says ma'lumat on it. Right? Ma'lumats are, right, points of information. So the thing that is known is ma'lum. Right? So here, the word that is in the state of nasab is mansub, or makhfud, or majzoom. So just to clarify that, the name of the state is these 4. The name of the word that applies to that state is either marfu', mansub, makhfud, or majzoom, on that same pattern of maf'ul. Maf'ul. Tamam. So we're going to close with the last of the 4. And then we have some kind of practice to do, as you have the papers, I believe. There's a few that have been printed, but if you want to run to the printer, just grab. We'll do some practice in the class, inshallah. And then we'll have some things just to solidify what we've done so far. So jazm, right, jazm is, right, it is a type of inflection that is signified by a sukun or its substitutes. It only occurs on verbs and has 2 signs. One of them being the default sign, which is the sukun itself, and the other one being an alternative sign as a substitute to the sukun. So the first sign, the sukun itself, we'll take that first, right, which is pretty straightforward, but we might have to draw something on the board. Actually, we can wait for the thing. So the sukun is only a sign of the majzoom, of a word that's majzoom, right? In those mudari' verbs that have the last letter is a sound letter. Right? It's not a sick letter, and we'll talk about what's a sick letter in a minute. Right? The sound letter is called sahih, like a sound hadith is sahih. Right? So the sound letter is sahih, and just in brief, the sound letter is every letter except for alif, waw, and ba. Sorry, alif, waw, and ya. Right? Alif, waw, and ya, they're sick letters. Right? And they call them sick letters because anything happens, they just fall off. Something happens, they just fall off, which is our second sign, which we'll talk about. Right? So any word that ends the last letter of that word, meaning the last root letter of that word, is a sound letter when it becomes, and we're talking about the singular ones, right? When it becomes majzoom, you'll see the sukun. So kataba yaktubu. Yaktubu means he is writing or he will write. Right? It comes from the same word as kitab. Yaktubu. When it's majzoom, lam yaktub. Yaktub. You see the sukun on the word. Right? There are many verses in the Qur'an. Right? Lam yakun. الذين كفروا. Right? Lam yalid wa lam yulad. Right? Lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. So any word that you see a sukun on the end of the verb, you know it's majzoom. You see a sukun on the end of the verb, right? You know it's majzoom. So, if that last letter is a sound letter. If the last letter is a sound letter and it has a sukun on it, the word is majzoom. If everyone can just, when you hand those out, if everyone can just turn to the last page. We wrote the whole chart for the mudari' verbs. The mudari' verbs. We wrote it on the board last week, but it's good that everyone has their own personal copy. I think some of you have memorized the 10 forms of the past tense, right? And this. Right, so I think we did do I'm not sure, in the previous class. We did start on the mudari'. Is there enough?
We need like 3 more.
Okay. Two more? You have 2 more? Okay. There's 2 more here. So I'm going to print 1 more. Just in case. Okay, so anyone want to be brave enough to read the mudari' scale? Anyone? Just read it as fast as you can, as smooth as you can. Anyone? Go ahead. Tef. Good. Right, so there's 14 words. Right, they all are mudari', so they all indicate either present tense or future tense. Right, so you'll notice that on there are words that have an ending that's an alif noon or a waw noon or a ya noon. Those are the 5 nouns that we talked about. Right, so if you just put a circle around the 2 feminine plurals, which is they will do, or they are doing, or they will do, 3 or more females, and you, 3 or more females. If you can just circle that, right, that one word, those, well, technically 2, they're mabni. They have nothing to do with i'rab. Right, they will never change, no matter what you throw at them. They are stuck like that. Right, so Mabani are the words that don't accept, they're not marfu', they're not mansub, they're not majzum or makhfud. They're an exception to the rule, and we'll talk about them in their own chapter. Right? But amongst the words that do accept inflection, right, are the rest of those on that list, right, of the verbs. Now, amongst the ones that remain, besides the two that you circled, there are some that end in a noon. Do you all see the noon? How many are there? If you count them. Do you have one? You don't have one? Do you have one, the paper? Okay. Just making sure. You don't have one. Okay. It might be there. I printed it just now. How many are there? 9?
7.
Okay, 9, 7. Any other opinions? Sorry? No, just count them separately. 7? Okay. Now, if you take out the repetition of the duals, right, so there's two taf'alanis, actually 3 taf'alanis. If you break them down to 1, then how many do you have left? If you count all the duals as 1, you have 5. We mentioned before the 5 verbs. The 5 verbs, right? Those are the 5 verbs because they didn't count the repetition of the duals. They just counted as 1. Right? So we mentioned already that besides the 5 verbs, if a word is marfu', you'll see a dhamma. So you see it yaf'alu, taf'alu, right? Af'alu, naf'alu, all of those, you'll see the dhamma on the end. The chart that you have there, they're all in default marfu'. All the verbs are marfu'. So verbs are marfu', right, until they are changed by some other governing agent that comes before them and causes them to be mansub or majrur, mansub or majzum. So what you have in front of you are marfu'. If you add the word lan in front of it, right, lan is one of the agents, the governing words that cause the word after it to be mansub. Right, so if I were to just read it to you, if I added lan to it, this is how the chart would go. Right, so the singular ones will get a fatha. All the words that have a noon, except for the circled ones, the noon will fall off. Right, so lan yaf'ala, lan yaf'ala, lan yaf'alu, lan taf'ala, lan taf'ala, lan yaf'alna. That doesn't change. Lan taf'ala, lan taf'ala, lan taf'alu, lan taf'ali, lan taf'ala, lan taf'alna. Doesn't change. Lan af'ala, lan naf'ala. Okay? If I put the word lem in front of it, and these are just examples, right? Lem is a word that causes the word after it to be majzum, right? To have a sukun if it's singular. So this is what we're talking about. The first sign is the sukun, but it's only in those ones that don't have a noon on the end. Right? So lam af'al, sukun. Lam yaf'ala, the noon falls off. Lam yaf'alu, lam taf'al, lam taf'ala, lam yaf'alna, doesn't change. Lam taf'al, lam taf'ala, lam taf'alu, lam taf'ali, lam taf'ala, lam taf'alna, doesn't change. Lam af'al, lam naf'al. Right? So certain ones of those, the ones that don't have the noon, right? The sign for them is a sukun. If they're majzum, you'll see a sukun. If they're mansub, you'll see a fatha. If they're marfu', you'll see a dhamma. Right? And we mentioned in dhamma, there are 4 words that you'll see the dhamma itself, either the singular noun, the broken plural, right? The unbroken feminine plural, muslimatun, you'll see the dhamma, right? Or the mudari' verb that has nothing attached to its end. Those are the 5 ones that we just mentioned, right? The 4 that we just mentioned, right? Right? Yaf'al, taf'al, af'al, and naf'al. Right? The first, the fourth, and the last 2. Right? So those, you'll see a sukun if it's majzum. Right? Now, we'll talk about words that have sick letters in them, because sometimes the sick letter falls off in the middle of the word, because it's majzum. Right? But we'll talk about that. Like lam yalid was lam yawlid. Right? The waw it gave up. It called a sick day. Right? Right? Lam yakun was lam yakun. Right? The waw took a sick day as well. Right? right? But the last letter is a sound letter, so you'll see the sukun. Right? Dal, lam yalid. The dal is a sound letter. Lam yakun, the noon is a sound letter, so it stays. Tamam. Right, so the 6 letters, alif, waw, or ya. Right, and we were thinking of giving some examples, just a little bit, on the board. You might have to move the camera, Sidi. I can just squeeze out of here. Can you guys see? Okay, so technically this is one of the discussions of sarf. So generally words have 3 root letters. Right. Now if any of the words have a waw or a ya or an alif, the alif is less common, right? Then they're called mu'tal. How many letters are at the end here? Anyone know what the root letters are of mu'tal? Can you guys see? That's a bit far. So mu'tal comes from, right, the word ilal. Ilal means sick, right? So 6 letters are mu'tal, but that's not important. So if it starts with a waw, like the word wa'ada, right, so that's mu'tal of the fa. That fa is like a column. Right? The fa column has a 6 letter. Right? You can have a fa column that has, right, or the middle one, the ayn column, has a 6 letter. Because qala was originally qawwala. So again, a waw. Right? And then you can have a one that has the last letter is the 6th letter. Right? Da'a is a verb, past tense verb, right? which was originally da'awa. Da'awa means to call. Da'wa is a invitation. Right? So if the word, right, this last one is what we're talking about, right? That the last letter is a 6th letter. Right? So if it's mudari', it's easier to see. So mudari' of da'a is yad'u. Right, so we'll just give a few more examples. Right, so that's da'a. Right, jara means to run. Right, the root mudari' is yajri. Right, in the Qur'an, right, the paradise, tajri tahtaha al-anhar, that rivers flow under it. So jara, yajri also means to flow or to run. Right? So just keeping that in mind, right, the words that have the last letter is a 6th letter, right, when they become majzoom, you're not going to see a sukun. Right? What you're going to see is that those 6 letters are going to fall off. They're just going to fall off. Right? So if I were to just do the scale, right, with yad'u, it'll be, if you just follow along on your papers, because on the paper I gave an example that have all sound letters. There's no 6 letters there. Right? But if you just follow along as I read, so yad'u, yad'uwani, yad'una, tad'u, tad'uwani, yad'una, tad'u, tad'uwani, tad'una, right? Tad'ina, tad'uwani, tad'una, ad'u, nad'u. So you hear the stretch at the end. Ad'u, nad'u. There's a waw there. If I make it majzoom by adding lam or whatever other word that causes that, right, it'll be lam yad'u. Just the dhamma on the ayn. The waw is gone. Lam yad'u. Lam yad'uwa. Lam yad'u. Right? Lam yad'u with a waw because the noon falls off. Lam tad'u. Right, so you'll see that, right, for the words that end in a 6th letter, when they're majzoom, the 6th letter falls off. If it's singular, right, if it has a noon on the end, the noon will fall off and the rest will stay the same. And just like yaf'al became sukun, yad'u, right, the waw drops off. يَدْعُو. Right? Allah says, وَلَمْ يَرْضَ بِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. وَلَمْ يَرْضَ بِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. It was يَرْضَى. But because lam is there, لَمْ يَرْضَ. The ya fell off. Because رَضِيَ, يَرْضَى. Any questions on that? If this is just going over the head, please stop me. We can do a lot more examples on the board. But this is really technically not grammar. This is morphology. But they intertwine in certain issues. Right, so the sikh letters are the alif, waw, or ya. Right? You see, yad'u is a word that it ends in a sikh letter of a waw. Yad'u. The root letters are da, ayn, waw. Yajri is a word that ends in a sikh letter of a ya. Right? It was ja, jim, ra, ya. Right? The root letters are jim, ra, ya. So if you look in a dictionary, you would look up jim, ra, ya. But if I put a lam in front of it, it'll be lam yajri. Just the kasrah, the ya falls off. Lam yajri. Or lam tajri, or lam ajri. I did not run. Lam ajri. I did not run. Lam najri. We didn't run. Okay? Right, we're not going to worry about the words that have the waw or the ya as the first letter or the middle letter, because that doesn't affect, right, our discussion now of a word that's majzoom. Only the ones that have a waw or a ya on the last letter, that last letter will fall off if it's majzoom. Right? If you talk about the first one, right, wa'ada, the mudari of wa'ada is ya'idu. It falls off anyway because it's hard to say yaw'idu. Yaw'idu is difficult. Ya'idu is much easier. And we already see that qala was qawala and the waw changed to an alif. Qawala became qala. Okay, so that brings us to the last sign. All right, so sukun only applies to those four words: yaf'al, taf'al, af'al, and naf'al. Right, or whatever word is being put in that situation. Right, you'll see a sukun on those four. Right, if the word ends in a sound letter. If the word ends in a sound letter, you'll see a sukun clearly. Yaktub, lam yas'al, lam yaktub, lam yadhhab, lam yashkur. Right, the Prophet said, lam yashkur an-nasa man lam yashkur Allah. Right, the one who does not show gratitude to the people has not shown gratitude to God. Right, lam yashkur. Right, so ra is a sound letter, so you just see the sukun. Right. Whether it's a sound letter or not, if it ends in a noon, the noon falls off. Right, so lam yashkur, lam yashkura, the noon falls. Right, if it's a sikh letter, a waw or a ya, then the waw drops off in the singular. Lam yad'u becomes lam yad'u. Yajri becomes lam yajri. Right, and any other one that ends in a noon, the noon falls off. So lam yajriya, lam yajri'u, or lam yajru, lam tajriya, lam yajrina. So he says, as for the omission, right, omission here, al-hadf, meaning hadfun noon, the omission of the noon. Right, we've seen that amongst the substitutes of the dhamma in the marfu' is the noon. Right, what noon are they talking about? Anyone? How is noon a sign for marfu', a sign for mansub, a sign for majzoom? Noon is in all three of them. But why? That sounds confusing to me. Well, so, right, if the noon is there, right, in the marfu', right, it's a sign that it's mansub. It's marfu'. Sorry. Any of the verbs that have a noon there, that's a sign it's marfu'. So if you see in the chart that I gave, they're all marfu', all the noons are intact. Right. In mansub, right, the noon falls off. Right, so when they say the sign of mansub is a noon, meaning the noon falls off. Right. So the first one, the noon stays. Mansub, it falls off. Majzoom, it falls off. So if there's no noon whatsoever in your verb, and there's supposed to be one, So yaf'alani becomes yaf'ala. First thing you should be thinking is mansub or majzoom. One of those two. Right, how do we figure out which one it is? What's a good way to figure out? How would you check? Good. Right, so you can check before it, or if there's any words that cause it to be mansub or majzoom, you can distinguish by that. Or there are some other things that cause it because of conditions of the sentence. Like if it's a conditional sentence, the if-then statements, the then gets majzoom. Right. So if it stays, it's rafa. If it falls off, it's either nasab or jazm. Right, clear as day. But that's only in the 5 verbs. The ones that have a noon on the end, we already excluded the 2 that you circled because they don't have i'rab at all. Besides that, besides the 5 verbs, right, the ones that are singular, there's aktub, naktub, right, yaktub and taktub, yaf'al, taf'al, af'al, naf'al. Right. If there's a sukun on it, that's clear. It's majzoom. If there's a fatha on it, then it's clear. It's mansub. Right. If it ends in a sick letter, how do you tell if it's mansub or majzoom or marfu'? How do you tell? What does yad'u look like when it's marfu'? Sorry? This one? Yad'u? The singular, just the first one. So the singular, what's the dhamma? On top of the ayn, but the last letter is the waw.
But that's not singular.
It is. Yad'u, yad'uwani, yad'una. It's a trick question, technically. Right. Yad'u originally was yad'uwu, yaf'alu, because it ends in a dhamma. Right. But nobody wants to say yad'uwu. You might break your wudu if you try to say that too much. Right. Yad'u. So there's a reason why there's no dhamma. It's supposed to be a dhamma. Right, but they don't speak like that. Same thing, yajri was yajriyu. Right, it's too difficult. Right, Arabic is very smooth, fluid. Right, so it was yad'uwu. So how do you know if it's mansub or majzoom? For which one? So if it's mansub, you'll see what? It's a tricky one. If it's majzoom, what happens? If I say lam, yad, just the dhamma, the waw falls off. But if it's mansub, you'll see lam yad'uwa. The waw can take a fatha. Lam yajriya, you'll see it still. Right, the noon won't, the last letter won't fall off unless it's jazm. It'll stay unless it's jazm. So yad'u, it'll have a sukun, but that's only because you can't read it the other way. Yad'uwu is too difficult. Yajriyu is too difficult. So that sukun, ignore it. Right. If it's there, right, and there's no fatha on it, it's marfu'. If it's there and a fatha on it, yad'uwa, yajriya, then it's mansub. If it's gone, it's majzoom, process of elimination. Those words are not as common as these sound letter words. So, on the slide, there's an extra example, yas'a. Yas'a ends in a alif. Right. Who can tell me what yas'a looks like when you make it majzoom? So lam, yes, what is it? Anyone, sisters? Just ayn fatha. Yeah, lam yas'a. Lam yas'a. Right, the alif falls off. So we gave example of a waw and a ya, but that's a sign of an alif. Right. Yas'a. And if you notice that the alif is seated on top of a ya shape, but there's no dots, right, on the slide. Yas'a. Right. If there's no dots, it's an alif maqsura. It's a standing alif. It's not a ya. But it was originally a ya. So yas'ayu. It was yas'ayu. But that nobody likes to say yas'ayu. Tamam. There's one thing that this book does not talk about, which would probably make a lot of things easier, is which words exactly are marfu'. Right? We saw certain words that the signs of marfu' can show up on them, like the singular noun, zaydun, you see the dhamma, right? The broken plural, right? Dhahaba rijalun, you see the dhamma, muslimatun, right? Some words you'll see a waw instead, abuka, akhuka, muslimun. We talked about that, where the signs show up, but which types of words get rafa'? We haven't talked about that. Right? So, inshallah, next class, we're going to kind of slightly step aside just to clarify that real quick, because it makes things a lot easier. There's only certain types of words that get marfu', that are marfu', and certain types of words that are mansub, right, about the nouns. So, for instance, the subject and the predicate are always marfu'. The mubtada and the khabar. The subject and the predicate, right? Zaydun, right? You can say kitab, al-baytu qadimun. The house is old. Subject and predicate. Al-baytu qadimun. Both of them are always, till the day of judgment, from the time of Adam alayhi salam till the last person born, they will always be marfu'. You can't say al-bayta qadimun. Right? They'd kick you out of Arabic class, right? If the teacher wasn't nice. Right? Objects are always mansub. From the day of Adam was born, until the day of judgment, all objects are mansub. Ra'aytu Zaydan. Right? Ra'aytu, I saw Zayd. Ra'aytu Zaydan. Ra'aytu Musa. Ra'aytu al-Muslimina. Ra'aytu kitaban. Darastu nahwan. Right? Whatever the word may be, any noun that is an object, it is mansub. Right? So that helps a lot. So if you're reading the Qur'an and you see a word that's mansub, you can know what type of word it is. And then from there you can translate. So we'll talk about that in the next class. Does everyone have a paper? It took us a few tries, but does anyone not have a paper? You have one?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it should be there. Tamam. So there's, can you see if there's an extra one there too? I think I printed more than one. Actually, I'll print it now so you get there. It's there. Allahu Akbar. Okay, so there's some verses there. It's the same 3 verses repeated for each subject. Right? The first one is marfu'. It's the state of rafa'. You want to find the words in those 3 verses that are marfu'. The words that are not, that are changed the color, leave those aside because they're mabni. Right? Don't worry about those. Any other words, they are mu'rab. They have i'rab, but you want to find the ones that are rafa'. Right? So either by the dhamma, right, or its substitutes. Okay. Right, once you find them, right, designate what sign shows you that it's rafa'. Right. Now the same 3 verses are there for nasab, and the same 3 for, right, khafd. Khafd actually has an extra one, an extra verse. Right. Yeah, just give me one. Right. Just so I can, yeah. So these are the 3 opening verses of Surah Al-Furqan. Right? And you'll notice that nasab has an extra verse at the end. Right? That's just one extra example. It's not in Surah Al-Furqan, somewhere else. Right, so the same verses. Right, and Jazm has one extra one as well. Do you have one? Sorry. Can you put it online? I don't know how to do that. How do I do that?
We can just share your screen.
Okay.
So you
How do I share the screen?
can You just need to open it.
Screen's on. My screen's on, but it's on desktop on there. It's not sharing. I think there's a way to share the screen. If anyone needs any help, just let me know, inshallah. So if you have your notes from the previous class, it'll probably help. Just to save you guys some headache, the first verse of Rafa doesn't have any Rafa in it. Right, so you can skip that one. Right, the second verse has 2. The third verse has a lot. Anyone having trouble? Any questions? How many people have finished marfu' and rafa'? One, two. Anyone still on rafa'? Finish the first one. Finished the whole thing? MashaAllah. Let me see. Do you know how to share the screen on here?
It's supposed to share.
It shares only when I press play. Maybe you can just Google it real quick. How to share a screen.
Is it sharing the screen?
No. Like here. If I press play, it goes there. If I'm off of that, it goes screen.
How about you copy paste the thing? Just make it.
That's nice.
It's quick.
It might not work the way that we want it to. Let's see.
Just take it, double click. Most of them are the same versions. That's it.
Okay, I got it. Okay. It's kind of better. Good. So for those who are online, we're looking for the words that are marfu' and what are their signs. So and so you'll notice that all the words that are shaded, right, they're past tense verbs. Right? All past tense verbs are mabni. They're not, they have no i'rab. Right? They never change. Nothing falls off. Right? And then anything else that's shaded would be because it's a particle. Right? All particles are mabni as well. And so all past tense verbs, all particles, and two out of the mudari', right, the two feminine plurals of the mudari', they're all mabni. They never change. Everything else is fair game. Good job, Masha. Okay. Has anyone finished nasab? One. Anyone feel like getting up and walking out? Whole thing? All of it? No, finish all of it. You can, yeah. Has anyone purchased the Hans Word Dictionary? Or who didn't have it now? Working on it? Inshallah, if you can bring it next week, we're going to learn how to use the dictionary, inshallah, as well as the class. Okay, let's pause for a minute and let's do marfu' together, inshallah. So the first verse, تبارك الذي نزل الفرقان على عبده ليكون للعالمين نذيرا. There's no sign, there's no word that's marfu'. Did anyone have any word that's marfu' out of those? Anyone? There's one word in there that could be confusing. And a lot of people on the homework confuse this, which is which word? Who knows which word I'm talking about? The only one who has any resemblance to a marfu', yakunu, right? Liyakuna, right? What would be the confusing sign? The waw. Right. Is waw a sign of rafa'? Yes. In verbs? No. Only in nouns. Right? Muslimuna, shakiruna. Right? That waw noon, or that waw at the end, that's a sign of rafa'. But in verbs, right, yaf'aluna, what's the sign? The yaf'aluna is marfu', but what's the sign? The noon stays. Right? Now, yukunu is tough because the last letter, the noon, is a root letter. Right? Kaf, waw, noon. Right? The plural of, if you use yakunu, it will be yakunu, yakunani. It will be two noons. Yakunani. The first one's the root word, letter. The last one is the one that will fall off. Right? So, lam yakuna. Right? Lam yakunu. So that first noon stays. So, liyakuna is singular. Right? It's mansub. You can see the fatha on the end. Right? Liyakuna, like yaf'ala. Like lan yaf'ala. But that's the only one that would be confusing. الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض. Mulku. Anyone get mulku? Dhamma. Good. What kind of word is it? Is it a broken plural? Is it a singular noun? Is it a unbroken feminine plural? Singular noun. Good. وَلَمْ يَتَّخِذْ. There's the word lam again, right? But that's for jazam. Waladan, walam yakun again. Right? There's a sukun there, but it's missing. Right? Yet lahu sharikun fil mulk. Sharikun. What's the sign? Dhamma. Right? Sharik means partner. Right? Wa khalaqa, past tense, mabni. Kulla shay'in فقدره past tense تقديرا واتخذوا من دونه آلهة لا يخلقون شيئا. Where's the marfu'? لا يخلقون شيئا. So the chart that we gave, the fi'l mudari' chart, if you put la in front of it, it just has negative meanings. They will not do, he will not do. So you can use that. So لا يخلقون, خلق means to create. يخلق, he is creating or will create. يخلقون, plural. Right, so they do not create shay'an, anything. So what is the word here that's marfu'? يخلقون. Good. What is the sign that it's marfu'?
No.
The waw?
No.
The noon. Good. Good. All right. شيئا وهم يخلقون. You'll notice that يخلقون is slightly different than يخلقون. يخلقون is reflexive. Right? They are not created. Right? It's not. They are not creating. They are not created. It's reflexive. We'll take that in upcoming classes. وهم يخلقون. Right? They do not create anything while they themselves are created. Right? يخلقون. What's the sign? Noon. What would it be if it was لم يخلق? Right? If it was a lam in front of it instead of a la? Majzoom. What would it be? The noon will fall off. Right? لم يخلقوا. Stretched. Right? وَلَا يَمْلِكُونَ مَلَكَ means to own something. That's why in the previous verse, لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ, to him is the dominion of the heavens and the earth. Right here, لَا يَمْلِكُونَ is used as a verb. So they do not possess, they do not own. شَيْئًا, right? Sorry, لَمْ يَمْلِكُونَ لِأَنفُسِهِمْ, for themselves, ضَرًّا, any ability to harm. وَلَا نَفْعًا, nor any ability to benefit. So لَا يَمْلِكُونَ, what is the sign? The noon stays, correct. Okay. وَلَا يَمْلِكُونَ again. They do not possess موتا ولا حياة ولا نشورة, death, life, or resurrection. Now, if it was mansub, how would it look? If يملكون was mansub, you say you put a lan in front of it. They will never possess. Right? لن يملكون. What would happen to the verb? Half, right? The noon would fall off because right, it's mansub. Tamam. So nasab, right? تبارك الذي نزل الفرقان. Right? We mentioned before, all objects are mansub. Right? Right? He sent down the Furqan, the criterion, right? The Qur'an, really. Right? He sent down the Qur'an, also known as Furqan. Right? So the object is mansub. Okay?
On the sentence before it, what about home? Would that be considered?
Good. Right. So home is a pronoun. Right? Home, even though it is a noun, right? You won't be able to see any changes in it because it's less than 3 letters. So it's like a pronoun, right? So it's mabni. Right? So all pronouns, as well as are similar to particles. So all particles are mabni, and anything that resembles a particle is mabni. Right? So either it resembles it in the number of letters that it has. So like the word men, who, that's a noun. It's a noun for question, but it only has 2 letters. It's not like a full verb, a full noun. It's more like a particle, like min. Exactly the same, but just to change haraka.
What about فَقَدَّرَهُ? The ha, is that the same thing?
Yeah, the ha is a pronoun. Right? So the pronoun is mabni, right? But you would say it's fi mahalli nasab. Right? It's in the place that had it been a normal word, it would have been mansub. Right? So because it's maf'ul, it's the object. Right? قَدَّرَهُ, he determined it. Tamam. Right, so mansub, تبارك الذي نزل الفرقان. What's the sign? Fatha, because it's a singular singular noun. Right? Ala is a harf jar, right? Harf khafd. It causes the word after to be makhfud. So ala abdi, he. Right? So we'll talk about that when we get to khafd. Right? Liyakuna, right? For those who are wondering, right? It's actually it's li en yakuna. The n is implicit. Li en yakuna. So n is harf nasib. It makes the word mansub. Right, so yakuna, what's the sign of yakuna? The fatha on the end. Right? The noon would be a sign if it was dual or plural. Right? And if it was dual or plural, like yaf'alani, yaf'aluna, right? That noon is not the root letter. It's an additional noon after the root letter. So yaf'aluna, the lam is the last letter. then the noon comes after it. Whereas kana, the root letters are kaf, waw, noon. Right, so the first noon, that's the root letter. Right, that you'll see yakunu if it's marfu', yakuna if it's mansub, or yakun if it's majzoom. But any additional noon after that, yakunani, that second noon would fall off. Yakununa, that second noon would fall off. Right. So this is it's kind of right, tough to see. Yakuna, it has the fatha. So, otherwise, it would be marfu'. لِيَكُونَ لِلْعَالَمِينَ نَذِيرًا. How about لِلْعَالَمِينَ? What kind of word is عَالَمِين? Like Muslimin. Sorry? There's a whole bunch of sound plural, but it's majroor. Why is it majroor? Because of the? Good, the li, right? Lil alamina. Even though it'll be alamina, even if it's mansub also. Right? It'll be right? Ra'aytu al-alamina. Marartu bil alamina. Same thing. But how do you know that this one's majroor or makhfud and not mansub? Because it has a harf jar before it, harf khaf before it. Likay or li'an? Yeah, likay. Yeah. Yeah. So, lil alamina, like if I said, هذا الكتاب للشاكرين. Right, this book is for the grateful ones. Right. Marfu', shakirun, mansub, shakirin, majroor, also shakirin. Right. But how would you know if it's mansub or majroor? Look at what's before it. If there's a harf jar or harf khaft, right. Lil shakirin, that gives it away. So lil alamin, nadhiran. What's the sign of nadhiran? Fatha. Good. الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض ولم يتخذ ولدا. What's the sign? Waladan. What does walad mean? Child, right? Boy. ولم يكن له شريك في الملك وخلق كل شيء. What's the sign of كل? Fatha. Good. شيء. فقدره تقديرا. تقديرا. مفعول مطلق. For those who were here before. The absolute object. It just emphasizes the word before. Right. وَاتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِهِ آلِهَةً. What kind of word is aliha? Sorry? Good. What's the sign? Fatha. Fatha. لا يخلقون شيئا. شيئا. Fatha. Right. It's the object of يخلقون. They do not create anything. The anything is the object. Right. وهم يخلقون ولا يملكون لأنفسهم ضرا. What's the sign? Fatha. Right, so all of them are darran, naf'an, mawtan, hayatan, and nushuran. And they're all objects. They're all mansub, and they're all, the sign of them being mansub is all fatha. Now, for nasab, there's an extra line, right, which is not part of Surah Furqan, not to get, right, I don't want to be confused. Right, وَوَهَبَنَا لَهُ مِنْ رَحْمَتِنَا أَخَاهُ هَارُونَ نَبِيًّا. Allah talks about Moses, right, Musa, alayhi salam. Right, he says, وَوَهَبَنَا لَهُ, we gifted him. Right, past tense verbs are mabani. Right, and we gifted for him, مِنْ رَحْمَتِنَا, from our mercy, أَخَاهُ, his brother, Harun, Aaron, right, نَبِيًّا, as a prophet. Right. So, which words here are mansub? Akhahu. Good. Right. What's the sign that it's mansub? The alif. Good. Right, so that's one of the 5 words. Right. If it was marfu', what would it be? Akhuhu. Good. Right. Akhahu Haruna Nabiyan. So Haruna, what's the sign? Fatha. Why isn't it Harunan?
Because it's describing a kha.
It is, right? But, sorry? It's a foreign name and it's a proper noun, right? So it's not Arabic name, right? And it has more than 4 letters. There's a lot of conditions, but right? So it's ghayrun munsarif, right? But it still gets a fatha when it's mansub. But if it was majroor or makhfood, if I said min Harun, would I say min Haruni? I would say min Haru na, right? Like min Ibrahima, because it's a non-Arabic noun, right? Nabiyan is tamyiz, right? For those who did before, right? It explains the ambiguity. We gifted him as what? Right? As a prophet. Nabiyan, what's the sign? Fatha. Right, now, Nabi is a really cool word, and for those who are keeping their vocab lists, hopefully everyone is. Right, Nabi has two plurals. You can either make it an unbroken masculine plural by saying Nabiyuna, like Shakiruna, right, or you can say Anbiya. Anbiya is a broken plural. Right, and it has 2 signs, or 1 sign that equals to 2. What is that? See how attentive you are. Anbiya'u. What was the sign? The 2 signs that equal 1. Alright, they each equal 2. The alif maqsura and the alif mamduda. Right, as-sama'u. Right, anbiya'u. So you say min anbiya'a. Tamam. That's out of our scope. Tabarak alladhi, sorry. Grammarians get caught off track. Tabarak alladhi nazzala al-furqana ala abdihi. Right. We're looking for makhfood words that are makhfood. Right. Abdihi, what's the sign? Kasra. Which kasra? The he or the di? The di, right? Because abd is one word. The he at the end is a pronoun which is attached to it. His slave. Right. So abdihi. لِيَكُونَ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Sister side got this already. Right, brother side. What's the sign that alamina is makhfood? We see the li is there, so we know it's makhfood, but why? What is the proof that it's makhfood? Brothers? For me, it looks like it ends in a fatha. We have ikhtilaf al-ummah. We have difference of opinion. Which one? Right. So noon is a sign of nouns or verbs? Verbs. Right. So if it stays, it's a sign that's marfu'. If it falls off, it's a verb that's either mansub or majzum. Right. For nouns, right? Alamina, what kind of word is it? I'll give you a hint. The singular is alam, world. A sound masculine plural, right? Like shakir, shakiruna, shakirina. You just add to the end. So what is the sign? It's ya, right? Ya, the fact that it's ya noon and not wow noon. The reason why they don't mention the noon as a sign, even though it's wow noon, shakiruna, right, or shakirina, ya noon, because that noon can fall off. Right? If it's mudaf to something else, it'll fall off. Right? ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ حَاضِرِي مَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. Right? That, if you look at it, it's written with a ya, because it was حَاضِرِينَ. Right? But it's mudaf. Tamam. عَالَمِينَ نَذِيرًا الَّذِي لَهُ. Right? So that's a trick one. Right? La is harf jar. Right, but the who is mabni, so we're not going to mention that. Mulku samawati. Mulku samawati. As-samawati. Why is there a kasra? Well, what's the sign that it's? It's a sound feminine plural. Right? If a sound feminine plural is mansub, what does it get? Sure, a thinking man's question, or a thinking woman's question. If a sound feminine plural was mansub, hypothetically, what would it get? Also a? Yeah, kasra, right? It would get a kasra. Right? But this one is makhfood. How do you know the difference? What's before it? Right? We haven't talked about phrases yet, which is why some books start with that, some books don't. Right? But there's a phrase called the possessive phrase. I think we talked about it before in one class. Right? That one thing owns another thing. Right? So, like for instance, Abdullahi, right? Slave of Allah, Abdullahi. Right? The one that owns in that phrase always is makhfood. The noun is makhfood. Right? So, Kitabu Zaydin, Zayd's book. Zayd's book. The second word is always makhfood. Mulkus samawati, right? The dominion of the heavens. Right? So the heavens is the one being, right? Right? It doesn't have to be literal, but right? The possession is ascribed to it. Right? The dominion of the heavens. So as-samawati is makhfood. Right? It's mudaf ilayhi for those who want the term. Right? And wal-ard is like saying wa mulkul ard. The wow, you don't have to repeat things over and over again. Right? So wal-ardi, what's the sign? Kasra. It's a regular word. Right? Just a quick note. Any word, most words that are round, the word that it indicates to is something round, they're feminine. Like bucket, and well, sun, moon, earth, all of those are feminine words. You're pretty safe off, right? If you see something, oh, it's the sun. Okay, sun, it's round, right? Do I say shams, right? Do I say hiya or do I say huwa? I would say hiya. Was shamsi wal duha ha. So ard is feminine, right? وَلَمْ يَتَّخِذْ وَلَدًا وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ شَرِيكٌ فِي الْمُلْكِ. Again, we have mulk. First time it was marfu', mulkus samawati. Here it's makhfood. Fil mulki. Sign is, quickly, kasra. Right? وَخَلَقَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Again, a possessive phrase. Everything. Right? Shay'in is, what's the sign? Kasra. Right? وَاتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِهِ. What's the word that's makhfood? Dun. Right? And the sign is the kasra. Right? آلِهَةً لَا يَخْلُقُونَ شَيْئًا وَهُمْ يُخْلَقُونَ وَلَا يَمْلِكُونَ لِأَنفُسِهِمْ. أنفسهم, their selves. So it's a possessive phrase. The him part is a pronoun. The anfusi. What's the sign? Kasra. Right? And there's no more kasras. The last one is jazam. What's the first jazm that comes? وَلَمْ يَتَّخِذْ. Before that, there's no jazm? No, you're right. لَمْ يَتَّخِذْ. Right? The verbs that we handed out, that is form 1. Right? There's 10 famous forms, 14 if you include the not so famous ones. Right? So you'll see that ittakhada looks a little, yattakhidhu looks a little bit different than yaf'adu. There's more letters in it. Right? But the endings, the rules apply to the endings the same as they do in yaf'adu. So yaf'alu, yaf'alani, yaf'aluna, yattakhidhu, yattakhidani, yattakhiduna, tattakhidhu, tattakhidani. Right? The same thing applies if the last letter, if there's a noon, the noon falls off. If there's not, then it will get a sukun. Right? Lam yattakhidh, lam yattakhidha, lam yattakhidhu, lam tattakhidh. The last letter is always the same. Right? So what's the sign that it's mansub? It's majzoom though. What is the sign? The sukun, right? Because the last letter is a sound letter, right? And it's singular. Right? Right? Had it not been a sound letter, the sick letter would have fallen off. Right? And had it not been singular, the noon would have fallen off. لم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن. Right? What's the sign? Sukun. Right? Right? The last letter, the noon, is a root letter. It's a sound letter, so it gets a sukun. Lam yakun. There was a waw in the middle, but if you say lam yakun, you can't have 2 seconds in a row, 2 sukuns in a row. Right? So if you have a sukun on the waw and a sukun on the noon, right, which letter can stand the test and not get dropped off? The sick letter or the sound letter? The sound letter. So the waw just, right, it forfeited its chance. Right? So lam yakun lahu sharikun fil mulki wa khalaqa kulla shay'in faqaddaru taqdira. That's it. Any more majzoom words besides that? No. Right, the last ayat, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahadun. What are the signs? Or what are the majzoom words? Yalid, yulad, and yakun. Right, so we mentioned already that, right, yalid was lam yawlid. Walada, right, we just used the word just now. Walad means child. Right? The verb walada yalidu means to give birth. To give birth to a child. Right? Past tense, it's walada. You see the waw. But present tense, the waw drops off. Yalidu. Right? It was yalidu, yalidani, yaliduna, talidu, talidani, yalidina. Right? Right? What's the sign? The sukun. Good. Right? And yulad is the same thing, except that it's reflexive. Right? And was not born. Right? And was not born. And he was not born. Right? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Right? And no one is like unto him. So lam yakun, again, sukun. So these are pretty straightforward ones. We chose the ones that had alamat al-zahira. They had clear signs. Right? They're not implicit signs. Okay, so have the word, for instance, Harun bin Musa, you would not have seen any fatha. Right? Had it been Yahya or then you would not have seen fatha. Right? Most of what we took, we had the default sign. Right? The fatha, the dhamma, the kasra, or the sukun. Right? But there was a couple that we had the alternative sign, like the ya noon of alameen. Right? And we had now on the board I put the verse for the next page, which is a verse of Surah Al-Kahf. And we'll just really quickly do this together. What we want to do is, right, 3 things. Right? What state is it in? What type of inflection is it? What is the sign? And what kind of word is it? Right? Is it a singular noun? Is it a broken plural? Is it unbroken masculine plural? Unbroken feminine plural? Right? So it's on the board here as well. Right? If you can show that, then we'll use the papers. So, al-malu wal-banuna zinatul hayatud dunya. Right? Wealth and children are the adornments of the worldly life. Of the worldly life. That's the translation. So you notice that, right, wealth and children are subject in this. Right? Right, so first word, al-mal. Al-mal. If you knew the word, what it means, it would help. But it's not a necessity. You can still figure it out by the signs. So al-mal, first, what state is it in? What type of inflection? Rafa. Now what's the sign of it being rafa? The dhamma. Right? Okay, and what type of word is it? Sorry? Yeah, what kind of ism? Sorry? Maf'ul? Mufrad. Say ism mufrad. Good. Right, ism mufrad, it's a singular noun. So mal means wealth, right? For those who have the vocab list going. Malun, mal is wealth. Plural is amwal. Amwal. Wal banuna. وَالْبَنُونَ. What state is it in? Rafa. Okay. What is the sign of it being rafa? The waw. Good. What kind of word is it? Sound masculine plural, like muslimuna. Right? The word originally was ibnun. Ibnun means son. Right? Ibnun was originally binwun. Binwun. Right? And it changed to ibnun. Right? Sometimes they use bin by itself. Right? There's a certain reason why they use that. So sometimes you'll say ibn, and sometimes you'll see bin. Ali ibn Abi Talib. Right? Isa ibn Maryam. Right? Right? But the plural of bin or ibn is banun or banin. If it's marfu', it's banun. If it's mansub or majrur, it's banin, like shakirin, shakirun. Right? And other verses you'll see, right? Banin. Al-banina wal-banat. Right? بغير علم. Right? So banun, the waw is the sign of the unbroken masculine plural. Good. Zinatul hayatid dunya. Zina. Good. Rafa. What's the sign? Dhamma. What type of word? Good. Ism mufrad, singular noun. Zina means adornment. There's three words that are very close to each other, and be very careful how you pronounce because they mean very different things. Right, so there's zina, there's zina, and there's zina. Right. Zina, right, za nun ta, means weight. It comes from the word wazn. Right. Zina ta arshi, and the weight of his throne. Right. Zina, words here, means adornments, like jewelry and things like that, are zina. And zina is fornication. Right. That's a different word. I saw a restaurant once, it was called Zina, but in English. Z-I-N-A. You have husni dhan that it means adornment, but it's very close to the other word. Right, so, zinatul hayati. Al-hayati. What's the state of the word? Khaft. Good. Or jar. Right, what is the sign? The kasra, which is clearly marked. What type of word is it? That's what kind of word, what role it plays, right? But what type of word is it by itself? It's not, it would have to be plural to be jama. Sound feminine? Is it singular or plural? Right, if it was plural, it would have the alif in the big ta, right? Samawat. Right? Yeah, it's a singular noun, right? It's mufrad, hayat. Right? If it was plural, it'd be hayawat. Right? There's actually a hidden waw in there. Right? Ad-dunya, this is a tough one. Ad-dunya. What is the state of the word? Jar. Good. This is a tough one. Why is it jar? Yeah, it's a descriptive word of hayat. Descriptions usually follow the same vowing as the word they describe. So if I said baytun kabirun, big house, they both would be marfu'. Right, so here hayat is it's a worldly life. Right, that's a descriptive phrase. Right? Since hayat has a kasra, dunya is also in a state of khaft, but because it ends in a alif, you can't see it. Right, so the sign of dunya being makhfud is that it's is a kasra that's implicit. It's not explicitly shown because you can't see it. Same thing if I said that هذا الكتاب, this book, li Musa, is for Musa. So Musa, the sign of Musa being makhfud, is a kasra that's implicit. It's assumed to be there. Had it been a normal word, you would have seen the kasra. But because it ends in alif, you can't put anything on the alif. Technically, alif is not a letter. It's just a stretch. Which is problematic because the first letter you learn in alphabet is what? Alif. It's a problem. Right? It's a problem I still haven't overcome. Right? Hamza is a letter. Right? A, I, U, or Hamza. Right? A, the stretch, is not a letter. It's just an addition to them. وَالْبَاقِيَاتُ الصَّالِحَاتُ, again, a descriptive phrase. You see they match. Okay. Al-baqiyat, what state is it in? Rafa. Good. What's the sign? So dhamma. What is the type of word? Sound feminine plural. Right? So you have the alif with the open ta. It's like samawat, baqiyat. What was the singular? If this is plural, what was the singular? Sorry? It still has to be feminine. Baqiya? Baqiyatun. Baqiyatun becomes baqiyatun. Like salihatun becomes salihatun. Right? Which I just gave away the next word. Apologies. Right? Al-baqiyat are those things which are everlasting. We'll talk about the meaning in a second. We translated the first part. As-salihatu. What's the state that it's in? Rafa. What's the sign? Dhamma. Brothers need to jump in. You're losing here. Represent. Right? Right. What's the type of word? Unbroken, feminine, plural. Good. Jam'u muannath salam. Singular, salihatun, with a small ta. Al-baqiyatu salihat are the everlasting good deeds. The everlasting good deeds. Okay. And according to one narration of the Prophet ﷺ, it's to say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. They're the everlasting good deeds. Right? And the Prophet said, for me to say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar one time is better for me than everything the sun rises on. Because by saying them, their rewards are everlasting in the next life. So khayrun, next word, khayrun. So the everlasting good deeds are better in the sight of your Lord as a reward and better as something to hope in. So that's the translation. Alright, so khayrun, what type of state is it in? Rafa. Sign? Dhamma. What type of word? Ism mufrad. Right. Right. Inda is a harf. So inda is mabani. It's stuck with a fatha. You'll never see it change except for a few exceptions because it's easier to pronounce. Rabbika. Rabbika, your Lord. So take off the ka because that's a pronoun. Right? The ka is your. Right? Rabb. Rabbi. What type of state is it? Jar or khaft. Whichever one you like to use. Right? What's the sign? Kasra, clearly mentioned, explicit. Right? What type of word? Ism mufrad, singular noun. Right? The plural is arbab. Arbab. Right? Arbabun khayrun arbabun mutafarriquna khayrun amillahu al-wahid qahar. And Surah Yusuf, he says, are various differing lords better, or one who is over all powerful, and one. So Rabb, Arbab. Now Rabb, you can only, no, that's a whole different subject. So Thawaban, so Thawaban, it's Mansub. What's the sign? Fatha. And it's a type of word? Ism mufrad. Good. Khayrun, we did again. Wa is a pronoun, is a particle. All particles are mabni, so we're skipping that. Khayrun, we already did. Amalan, mansub, sign, fatha, word. Good. All right. Lastly, to close, right? Wa har is a particle. Lakin is also a particle. Right? Allah. Right? Right? The word Allah is mansub. What's the sign that it's mansub? The fatha. Right. What type of word? The greatest singular noun of all time. Right? Dhu fadlin. What state is dhu in? Rafa. Good. What's the sign that it's rafa? The dhamma? The wow. If it was mansub, what would it be? Dha. Good. right? If it's majroor, it will be the. Good. So dhu fadlin, fadl. What's the state?
Sure.
Jar or khaft. I think we have a consensus on jar. I agree with you. I like jar. Right. Sign? Kasra. Right. Type of word? Ism mufrad, right? Right. Fadl means, right, bounty. So dhu fadl, the possessor of bounty. Right. Rather it is Allah who is the possessor of bounty. Ala al-alameen. Ala, upon. Right. Having a favor upon. Alameen. Last thing, and we'll close. Alameen, what state is it? Jar. What's the sign?
Yeah.
The ya. Good. Alameen instead of alamoon. Right. And what type of word is it? Shakirin, shakirun. Right. The unbroken masculine plural. Good. Right. Well done. Was that so difficult? Right. It's a lot to juggle, but it finds its place in the amazing creation of the brain. The last two things, for those who have it, take it home, right, and try to do what's mentioned there in the instructions. Right, these are verses from the Qur'an, so make sure to have wudu when you're doing it, right, if possible. If not, then just do it anyway, because it's homework and not really recitation. So there's room for that. And then do your best for your own benefit to memorize this chart. Right? Practical way, 3 words a day for the week. It's 14 words. So if you do 3 a day for 5 days, right, you're already past, you already finished it, and you're starting to revise. 3 words a day. You want to read the whole thing? Smooth. Doesn't have to be fast, but smooth. Yaf'alu, yaf'alani, yaf'aluna. Taf'alu, taf'alani, yaf'alna. Right? Something like that. Right. And then next week we'll practice making it mansub by memory. And majzoom by memory. Lam yaf'al, lam yaf'ala, lam yaf'alu. Tamam. Any last questions? Sorry for going over the time. وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. If there's any questions during the week, you can just reach out. Most of you have my contact, or you can, inshallah, whoever didn't get this, like for instance those are online, or then we'll try to send it via the registration, inshallah. جزاكم